There was a widow who was born in 1774 in New York City. At the age of 20, she married a very wealthy man, and they had 5 children. They both were Episcopalians. The time came when her husband became very ill. He lost his fortune, and his health was declining. They made the decision to move to Italy because the climate there would have been perhaps more conducive to his health. They were only in Italy for 6 weeks when he died. She didn't know what she was going to do, but there was a wealthy Italian Catholic family who saw her plight with her children, and they provided for her and her children for a while until they could get back to America. Because of that Catholic family and their care for them, she decided to investigate the Catholic faith, and she became well taken up with it and converted to Catholicism, as well as her 5 children. Her family disowned her completely. So when she got back to America, she didn't have any help from her family or friends, but she made a livelihood by teaching. As time went on, she formed the first order of Sisters of Charity in America, and she formed the first Catholic school in the United States. Her name was Elizabeth Ann Bailey Seton. You may have heard about her before, a saint of our modern times who truly was a saint. Saint Elizabeth Ann died at the age of 46. She had been a married woman, a mother, a widow, foundress of a religious order, and foundress of Catholic school education. And she did all that in 46 years. Amazing. But it took her all. She gave her all out of love for God and for others. I thought of this story in the gospel where we have this woman who is a poor widow. Widows had no place in society, no rank in society. If they did not have a man, a brother, or a son, or someone to care for them, they were out on the streets. But this poor widow comes in and Jesus notices her. We might think the story should have gone differently, that Jesus was observing wealthy people ostensibly putting money into the treasury so that everyone could see. And he knew in their hearts that it was not from sacrifice, it wasn't from love, it was because they wanted to be recognized. And so they gave from their surplus wealth. But then here's this poor woman who has literally so little, just a few coins, and she puts it all into the treasury. Jesus must have seen in her heart her love, that was done out of love. We would think that he would have sent his apostles over to her and said, no, don't put that in there. You can't afford that. We'll take care of you. And Jesus would have given her some money. But I suspect that he saw such a beautiful act of love in her heart that he didn't want to interrupt it. And she gave of her all. Reminds me of the day I was ordained. I may have shared this story with you before, but on the day of my ordination, which was January 11th, 1975, at St. John's Cathedral, I was the only priest ordained that day. And afterwards, there was a reception in the hall there at the cathedral for everyone who had come to the ceremony. And there's a special graces that people receive if they get the first blessing of a newly ordained priest. So the people, there was a place with a kneeler. My mother and father were standing on either side of me, and people were coming up one by one to receive my first priestly blessing. It was very touching. My hand was going like this for a while all day long. But towards the end, this elderly woman, kind of short in stature, with a shabby kind of black coat, came up and asked for my blessing. And I gave her the blessing. Then I was so moved because she kissed my hands. And then she took my hand and she put into it some money. And I wanted to give, I started to say no, and I'll give this back to her. But my mother leaned over to me and said, you can't, you have to take that money. She's not giving it to you, she's giving it to God. I learned that lesson. And so I accepted it and put it in my pocket. I thought of her often. She just came in off the street. She was not an invited guest. And there was $1 bill, 1 quarter, and 4 dimes, $1.65. I had a little box from Hallie's jewelry store. Remember Hallie's downtown? And I put the money in that box, and I have it in a drawer in my room that I open every day. And I look at that box, and I think about the contents. I cherish the contents because I think it's like a relic. She gave of her want. She gave all she had for a blessing from Christ. And it reminds me that I need to do the same thing, that my motivation for doing good for someone or giving to charity has to be love of Christ first and love of others. And to do that means giving of your all sometimes. It's a great lesson to learn. And I think the scriptures today really remind us that we should from time to time even examine our own motivations for why we do what we do. Because if we really are doing it for the love of Christ, then certainly it has great merit. Does God expect all of us to give away every single thing we have? No, he doesn't. But he expects us to give with a loving heart. The scribes that he was getting after here in the gospel were doing it for show. They just wanted to see, oh, look what we're giving. But Jesus knew that they were giving from their wealth. It was not even a sacrifice. And so he wants us to be sure that we're giving out of love for him and love for others. And that the sacrificial nature is so very important. Remember that Jesus always tells us in the gospel that whatever we do to another, we do to him. But the bottom line is that it always must be done out of love for him and love for others.